Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte, an award-winning podcast where we explore the topics that matter most in business. I'm Annie Wong and this is episode 62, where we ask, are leaders born or made?
I was leading when I was pouring coffee and I made sure the coffee was brilliant and I loved serving it. It was going to be the best coffee. It's like, I lead the coffee break, okay?
One of the important points there, letting people hold the ugly mirror up to you. People calling you when they see you being inconsistent.
I've never understood the phrase, dance as if nobody's watching, because I like to dance on a podium and, you know.
You can take the fish out of water, the fish being the leader, and immerse them in a shiny training program and then plop them back into the dirty water. That doesn't give them skills or capabilities to change that water.
Hello and welcome back to The Green Room for our first episode of 2024. If you haven't listened to us before, you'll be delighted to know we have over 60 episodes of The Green Room and you can listen to each and every one of them wherever you get your pods, and we're also on YouTube. I'm very happy today to be joined by my co-host, Lizzie Elston. How are you, Lizzie?
I'm good, Annie. Really happy to be here. This is our first Annie Lizzie podcast
know.
together. So, you know, looking forward to it. And
Yes.
We've got some great guests as well. So looking forward to getting into it.
Yes, we do. And I think the new year is always a great time to reflect on intentions and goals and things you might want to get out of the year. And leadership, which is what we're talking about today, is a big part of that. And so the big question of the day is, are leaders born or made? And so we'll be talking about what makes, successful leadership, how has that changed and evolved over time, and what can we all do regardless of our role or our level of seniority to be a better leader. Lizzie, obviously we cannot tackle this alone, so we've got two fantastic guests with us today. Who have we got?
We have indeed. So delighted this week to be joined, first of all, by Jonathan Mildenhall. Jonathan is the co-founder and chairman of 21stCenturyBrand, a growth brand consultancy. And he's also the curator of A Colourful View from the Top, a book highlighting 21 extraordinary voices of black and brown excellence in business. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
And also we're joined today by Tim Clayton-Ball, who is a senior partner here at Deloitte and head of Deloitte Leadership, which involves developing our clients as well as our people. Welcome, Tim.
Welcome. I'm so excited to be here. There you go.
It's me who's just got off the plane, not you.
Let's welcome each other.
I came from Wales this morning, so come on.
Explains a lot, yeah.
Jet lag with me.
So let's crack on with the opening question. And Tim, let's actually start by coming to you first on defining what a leader actually is.
Yeah, and that's a really big question as well, because I think you automatically go to people that have badge, rank, title in organisations. But in fact, leaders can be anywhere and anyone, right? So that probably gives you a hint as to where I'm leaning. But essentially, these are people that create followership, really inspire action, hopefully in a positive direction, but really inspire and motivate people to do something and to follow them, to create ultimately a greater good, in my mind.
So it's not about barking orders.
I wouldn't say so.
It used to be about barking orders.
Used to be. Years ago, yeah.
We've seen a massive shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. And Jonathan, you've been recognised as a global leader in branding and marketing and commercial creativity for 3 decades now. What's the definition of a leader for you?
Well, I agree in a lot of what's just been said. I think that over the course of the last 3 decades that I've been in business, we have seen a shift in effective leadership. Traditionally, hard skills and skills that come from practicing your domain have led to a certain leadership style. But over the last decade, we've seen softer skills come in, primarily motivated by things like emotional intelligence, empathy, compassion, and those are the skills that I think younger generations in the workforce look to and find much more inspirational than some of the traditional harder skills.
Do you think that alongside those changes and that growth in soft skills, that the expectation of what a leader is and who a leader should be has also changed?
Yeah. I think that, we've seen, say, Gen Z particularly, expect leaders to have a sense of human authenticity, a sense of purpose, and an ability to connect with deep intimacy. I don't mean intimacy in the kind of like touchy-feely way. I mean, into me does my leader see, and into my leader am I able to see. The modern day work environment with remote and out of the office and technology such as Zoom, it's actually quite challenging to be an intimate leader, but leadership is about a practice, and so you have to practice the necessary skills, I think, on a daily basis to make you a really effective leader.
And what you're describing there to me shouts trust as well, because there has to be a trusted relationship, I guess, as part of being a leader, and by sharing and being open, you're giving of yourself, I guess, and starting to build that trust, and someone else who could be seen as your follower is taking that from you and sharing back, and the next thing you know, you've got a great relationship.
Yeah, I think it's all about trust-based vulnerability. You need to be able to put your hand up and say, I don't have the answer to something, and to be able to ask the questions and to ask for help and show your vulnerability. And I don't know whether you're the same, Jonathan, but the leaders that we work with really struggle with that concept, showing that vulnerability, because it's perceived as a weakness. If I ask for help or if I say that I'm struggling, I will be viewed in a certain way. And I think there's still stigma with that. I don't know if you see the same, Jonathan?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you want to be an effective leader, then you have to show up with such a high degree of authenticity. And authenticity without vulnerability can feel very, very fake. Certainly a practice that I use is to be as vulnerable as the situation dictates. When we sat down to write the book, A Colourful View from the Top, I was struggling to get into my own introductory narrative, and I had to write that first because I wanted to give all of the other leaders an example of where my raw, often brutal vulnerability had actually led to me being able to equip myself with a bunch of skills that still to this day are very effective in my ability to lead a very diverse and disparate bunch of talent.
How did you manage to do that out of interest? Because I feel like, Tim, to your point, that's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people, having that humility, which I completely agree is such a huge part of leadership and trust building. But if you've never done that before, or you've never seen a leader do it for you, how do you build the confidence and skills to do that for yourself?
It was interesting on writing the opening to this book with such a high degree of vulnerability, so that I knew that I could create trust as people started to spend time with the book. I've never understood the phrase, dance as if nobody's watching, because I like to dance on a podium, and so I was like, why would you ever want to dance with that? But
I wasn't built for the podium.
I want to know where you go dancing. I'm going to come and join you.
But as I was sat down to write this thing, and it was really, really important that it was my truth, my authentic truth, with all of the scars and the shadows and the negative experiences that I've had. And this phrase came into my mind, which was, write as if nobody will read it. And as soon as I came up with that phrase, write as if nobody will read it, it doesn't really matter. It's your story. Just pour it out there. I couldn't stop. And it was a very cathartic thing to do, actually. But sometimes, in order to sit in your vulnerability, you really, really have to ignore the reaction from others. Now, the reaction from others in this book has been tremendous, but if I was thinking about the reaction for others, I probably would have limited some of the authentic vulnerability that is in the book.
And it comes through in the book. That's my second copy that I want your signature on, by the way. The first copy is full of highlighters, and I think there's so many valuable lessons learned from the 21 people that you spoke to. And there's something that sticks in my mind, and it was Suki Sandhu. Be unapologetically you. Yes. And I think there's something in that when it comes to the leadership piece, that you know your own truth, know your own proverbial, the word I'm going to say anyway. But you've got to know yourself in order to lead and inspire and to create that followership, I think.
When you were sort of coming up through the ranks yourself, Jonathan, did you have people that you could look to who were demonstrating this sort of leadership, so that you were learning from them, or is it something you learned just from your own accord?
No, I feel very, very lucky that I've always had the foresight to look around the room very consciously and go, I'm going to take that from her and that from her, and I'm going to leave that from him, and I'm going to leave that from him.
Not Tim, because he's full of wisdom.
But that's something that I would encourage people to do. Every person you interact with is a lesson,
Yes.
a potential lesson. The decision making from that lesson is, do I want to take what she has, and do I want to leave what he has? When I think of how I show up, I would expect people to be critiquing me and going, I like it when Jonathan flexes in this direction. I don't particularly like it when Jonathan flexes in this direction, because I hope that I'm a lesson to anybody that I'm interacting with, for good and bad. And I would expect them to leave the bad, and I would expect them to embrace the good.
I mean, maybe we'll come back a bit more to your journey, because it's interesting. We're sitting here with two great leaders in your own right, and it would be good to hear a little bit more about your own journeys to where you are today, and kind of whether there was a turning point when you realised that you were a leader. And Tim, I wonder if we can turn to you and you can tell a bit more about your story.
My mum passed away when I was quite young, and I was the only one at home at school still. Everybody else was working. So there was an expectation on me that I would be the one that would take mum's place, do the shopping, the cleaning,
Wow.
all of the domestic stuff, because we couldn't afford help at that time. And I realised pretty quickly, unless I did something about it and took control of my own situation, that I would be stuck there, and I'd probably end up at the local supermarket. At that point, I didn't realise I was dyslexic, and there was a reason why, schoolwork wasn't such a gift for me. It was a hard slog. So I got out of the home situation pretty early, funded myself, got jobs, then later came back to study. But that was a journey of, I guess, personal leadership that took bravery, and we always talk about courage when it comes to leadership. But that was really early on, and I think that pretty much set an independent streak in me from an early day, which meant that I was always a bit strange. I'm sure we'll come on to this, but I have more feminine traits than masculine traits. And at the time when I was coming through the work system, my word, I was a bit of a weirdo, because I had feelings, I cared about things. And so, particularly being in an environment like, the professional services, until very recently that wasn't accepted. You always had to have an element of veneer and have your armour on in order to survive, if not thrive, in the environment. So more recently, I think my, I'm feeling, and I'm very, very intuitive, I feel that things are changing for the better. And that people like me with more feminine traits, thinking about collaboration, thinking about, empathy and things like that, and how you show empathy day to day are really important, and being more valued. We've still got room to go, I think.
One of the things that you talked about there was finding some courage at that young age. And is that something that was just innate as part of you? Was it somebody that advised you? Because the question of this podcast is, are leaders born or made? And I'm just wondering whether that was something that was within you. Yeah,
definitely innate. And
Yeah.
I think for me, and again, when you look at the leadership theory, this comes out in bundles. But I think from an early age, I had a pretty clear vision of the sort of life I wanted to leave. I think people call it like vision boards and things now, where you've got your ideal life. But I had a view of what I wanted life to be like, where I wanted to be living. And so that was in me from an early age by looking around, looking around. I mean, I came from a very working class family. Parents struggled to buy their council house. And I went to the local comprehensive. When I was starting out, in this industry, you wouldn't talk about that sort of stuff. Now it's celebrated. So I think that innate ability is definitely part of what makes a leader. Then it's partly learnt skills, right? And I think we're all on a journey where we're learning continuously. We never stop learning.
Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, we have so many things in common. which is really incredibly comforting because, my story is, I was the only black person that grew up in a house full of white people. So my 2 older brothers are white, my 2 younger brothers are white. My mum had all 5 boys by the age of 26, and she had a brief encounter with my father, a Nigerian guy, in 1966, and I'm the result of that. And I really, really didn't like the colour of my skin up until I hit puberty. And then when I hit puberty, I became quite big and quite athletic. And so I started to compete. And it was only when I competed that I found a bunch of other young black men that were also competing. And I was like, oh, this is my posse. And I felt very, very good about that. And, at the age of 13, I wouldn't necessarily say that I was a leader, but I was an influencer. I could influence the posse as to where we'd go and hang out, what we might wear, the kind of music that we listened to. And I really enjoyed that role of being an influencer. But then I started to really struggle with my sexuality. And it took me a good 7 years to accept the fact that I was actually gay. And so in my teenage years, I was full of this natural ability to influence, but this incredible shame. I was really, really, I spent a lot of time buried in shame about my sexuality. And then a series of incredible, lucky events and brilliant people that spotted something in me that I didn't even realize I had. I ended up becoming the first ethnic minority to be taken on by McCann Erickson London as part of their official graduate training program, which, given that I went to Manchester Polytechnic, I grew up on a council estate, I was black, they didn't know that I was gay at the time. I thought that would be too much. But it was an incredible achievement. Absolutely. And I always credit McCann Erickson, because when they called me up to say, we'd like to offer you one of 4 positions, they actually said, there's something very special about you, Jonathan, but we've never recruited anybody like you. And so this is going to be a bit of an experiment. It's either going to work or it's not going to work. Now, I don't know if you could say that to somebody today, but I'm so grateful that McCann said it, because it gave us all license to try. I was an experiment. Some experiments succeed, some experiments fail, but that's going to be okay. And I started as an account person, and honestly, from the first day of my professional career, pouring coffee, taking notes, and sending out the minutes was a leadership function. When I was leading, when I was pouring coffee, and I'd make sure the coffee was brilliant, and I loved serving it. It was going to be the best coffee. It's like, I lead the coffee break, okay?
Set the bar.
And I really, really enjoyed that. And I think, growing up as an account person in a London agency where creative people want direction, clients want direction, planners want direction. Yeah. Everybody was looking to account management to lead. And I was like, great, this is the ideal place. Now, I knew that it was important that I would lead initially through the hard skills, my organization, my strategic writing, my budget management. They were the hard skills that built credibility in my ability to lead. But it was only when I became head of account management, which was probably about 11 years into my career, where I started to go, right, okay, there are people looking at me who I don't actually have a day-to-day responsibility for. So how can I now start to use vision and charisma and some of the more emotional skills so that everybody in my department felt seen, felt valued, even if I wasn't working with them on a day-to-day basis. And so that's kind of my journey into it. But what you said about masculine and feminine, I genuinely believe that every human being has masculine and feminine in them. And the most effective leaders today are the ones that see leadership as a fluid spectrum. And there are some times that you have to show up and you have to be a little bit more masculine and a little bit more disciplinarian and a little bit, but you kind of flex into that. And I always give my team warning. If this doesn't go well, then, the harder Nigerian's going to come out. But then there are other times when I know it's going to be so much more effective if I use some of my feminine skills to motivate and inspire and coach and mentor, because I want to breed creativity or breed collaboration with my team at the moment. And so I would encourage anybody that's listening to be really, really conscious about, in their daily lives, when do they flex slightly feminine? When do they flex slightly masculine? Because the more conscious you can be about that scale, the more effective you're going to be to a wider bunch of people.
See, I struggle with this masculine, feminine concept, if I'm being honest. And I don't know if you do as well, Lizzie, but I find that as a woman, a lot of leadership programs and initiatives are very much targeted towards helping and coaching women feel more comfortable emulating more masculine traits. But there's lots of research that says that both men and women don't like women who emulate those traits. You know, confidence very quickly turns into arrogance. Assertiveness very quickly turns to aggression. Being direct could be, you know, described as being bossy. And I think that getting that balance and almost changing the traditional perceptions of leadership is really difficult. And I think there's a lot of it is, you know, young, up and coming leaders being coached in leadership skills. But then I also think it's current and older, for want of a better word, leaders also being coached to view what successful leadership looks like in a different way, and it not always be those more alpha male or masculine traits, and to not perceive them in that different way.
Firstly, you should get your money back on the programs that you've been on. Clearly, I haven't been part of designing those. But I think you know, times are changing, and I think there's much more respect and understanding of the importance of, you know, both yin and yang, as you said. I think equally we've got to recognise that in the past we've over-indexed on alpha masculine traits. You know, all about hard drive, logic, rational, you know, lack of emotion, lack of care. And now we need to over-index on the softer side. And I hate that word, right, when people say soft skills, because they're the hardest skills. But equally, I think we've got to see that flowing through in organisations. We've got a lot of people talking about it, recognising the need for it. I know certainly when we have conversations now with clients, they are asking us about how we develop, you know, a balanced capability set within their leadership cadres. So it's flowing through, but the challenge is the pace of change is kind of immense.
Did you know at Deloitte we support social enterprises through our 5 Million Futures programme? Like Loaf Catering, part of Now Group in Northern Ireland. They support people with learning difficulties and autism into jobs with a future. If you're based in Belfast, you can now order Loaf's delicious food to go. If you're further away, just visit loafcatering.com, where you'll find beautiful mugs handmade by Loaf's in-house potter, just like the ones we have here on the green room table. Now back to our topic of the day.
I do want to also come back, because it's important to me to recognise the discomfort that you had on masculine, feminine, and how that might have been taught to you. I'm very, very, very lucky that I have a set of twin likes, a little brown-skinned girl, a little white-skinned boy. My son, they're only 4 weeks apart, but my son was born 30% heavier than my daughter, and still to this day, even though she's 4 weeks older, still to this day is around 30% heavier. And they've just started doing jiu-jitsu, and it's totally cute to watch. But my daughter came to me one day and she said, "Daddy, I'm really, really sad." "Why are you sad?" She said, "Because Oliver's stronger than me, and, you know, I'll never be able to." And I, "Oh, right. Daddy and Dominica have to have a conversation about strength. How do you define strength?" I mean, she's only 4 years old. "How do you define strength?" "Well, Oliver can push me down to the ground." I was like, "Yeah, but you're so strong. Look at your strength of character. Look at your strength of determination. Look at your strength of will." And you could tell that I was gifting her a concept that she thought was exclusive to her younger brother. I could tell she was like, "Oh yeah, I am strong." "Yes, you are, and don't let anybody tell you that you're not strong."
Love it.
So I think it's important that we degenderize the language and expand these concepts so that everybody can genuinely see themselves in it. And your definition of strength and his definition of strength and my definition of strength are going to be very, very different, but they're all legitimate. And sometimes you have to show up really, really strong and completely steely and focused. And you do it in your way, and he'll do it in his, and I'll do it in mine. But those leadership traits shouldn't be gendered, because if you're going to be a successful leader, we all need the entire toolkit.
You're talking about leaders having lots of capabilities in one person, but also there are different types of leader, I guess. So it'd be useful just to sort of have a bit of a chat about that. And, Jonathan, you wrote a book about this. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about, what your observations are of different types of leaders.
I think the most important principle for any leader is to truly understand what your values are and how your values can be implemented in the way that you lead. So I am very clear. I try each day to be a really, really good human being, and I try each day to be as creative as possible. And anybody in my team, people who work with me in person on a daily basis, or people who've never met me and we only work remote, know that humanity and creativity are the bookends of my leadership style. And the one thing that I encourage all leaders to really, really think about are what are the values and principles that you practice every day that you can share with your team so that your team can hold you accountable for actually practicing them every day. I mean, if I turn up and I'm an a-hole, somebody goes, because people will call me out on it and go, actually, Jonathan, you preach humanity and you preach empathy and compassion and intimacy, but right now you've just been really, really harsh with me and I don't see it. And if that was to happen with me, it would create a wholesale reflection on what it is that I've just been practicing, because it's the antithesis of my values. Leadership will change depending on the inherent values that each individual leader will have. But I do think they've got to come back to one or two values that you can practice every day and you can share with people, and they'll hold you accountable for it.
One of the important points there, Jonathan, is letting people hold the ugly mirror up to you. People calling you when they see you being inconsistent. And it's about creating the environment where people can do that and they feel safe enough to do it without any repercussions. Yeah. And that's the thing that we don't see happen very often. People talk a good game, but very often do they truly allow that feedback to come through. And
Tim, listening to what Jonathan's talking about here, I wonder if you can share a little bit about the work that you do helping clients to become better leaders and to perhaps embody some of these traits that Jonathan's talking about.
Yeah, sure. So it's probably worth saying that oftentimes I get called in when there's a problem, either at an individual leader level or at a leadership team level, where they're not leading in a way that's creating the impact that's needed, or where the team is just being dysfunctional, not working together, falling out, being very, very passive aggressive, nodding in the room and then doing something completely different when they... So oftentimes you get called into those situations. And then the other side of the spectrum is where you can go in at the beginning from doing the deep assessment work that we do with clients. So really understanding the psychometric profile of a leader to help them understand where they need to develop, right through then to the development journey that, again, in some organizations there's a bit of a myth that you can go to a 3-hour training session and then the problem's solved, right? Whereas for many, if not most of us, it's a development journey that's not just about sitting in a classroom. It's also about having that one-to-one support as well. So coaching, but I think more and more as well, recognizing that context is everything. And you've got to think about the context that the leader is operating in and really help them to understand how they're going to lead through that situation, that context. So we do a lot of work around, wicked problems. How do we get clients working on their own problems as part of that development journey? We've got, as you'd expect, the ideal view of what capabilities are required from great leaders, but that's just the start point. Then each leader needs a different journey. It's not a one size fits all, and we've got to take that into account in the work that we do. And I would say that the response and the demand for that is increasing, there's more maturity around the fact that, we always talk about, you can take the fish out of water, the fish being the leader, and immerse them in a shiny training program and then plop them back into the dirty water. That doesn't give them skills or capabilities to change that water. And we need most leaders in most organizations to be changing the water. And so that's where we focus our time and attention.
I think that's a really good point, and I really like this idea that it's a constant development journey, and a real crux of successful leadership is constantly learning, relearning, and maybe even unlearning certain behaviours and traits.
Yeah.
But would you say that, kind of going back to our big question of the day, when you're doing these sessions and workshops with these leaders, do you notice that a lot of them do have certain natural abilities in those kind of capabilities that you were talking about?
Yeah.
Or would you say that the more successful leaders are the ones that are far more willing to come to the table and say, okay, I'm nurturing this skill, I'm nurturing that skill, not so good at this, not so good at that. I want to be better at these capabilities. How do I do that? But do you think they all have that natural ability to begin with?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I know that's like sitting on the fence a little bit, but I think it's a bit of both. You've got, and I would say my female clients are probably more aware of the areas that they perceive they need development in, the areas that they're strong at versus the things that need developing. I think that's why the things like psychometrics help to give that insight on this is you as a leader. How do we improve? And very, very often times it's about, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Jonathan, it's about sometimes we can be a bit narky, a bit tired, a bit emotional, and that can bring out the worst of our behaviours, right? So strengths overplayed. And I think helping leaders to appreciate, the pitfalls in their capability and personalities will help them to think about how they moderate or how they adapt to different situations, because it's a tough old world, right? And it's getting tougher.
I really appreciate the whole concept of servant leadership, because if you practice servant leadership, you are naturally showing up with a disproportionate sense of curiosity. So how can I be of service to you? How can I help? What barriers do you want me to help reduce? What drivers do you want me to help promote? I think that a lot of leaders have different natural areas of strength, but the common thread, certainly in A Colourful View from the Top, the book on the table, and from a lot of studies, more academic studies that I've read, a common thread is a growth mindset and a disproportionate level of comfort with being curious.
We've touched on it earlier about grade not making a leader, but that leaders come at all ages and parts of their career. And I wonder, if that's something that we might explore a little bit more, and how do we build that leadership from a really early start?
I think it was Young that said characters fixed by the age of 7 or 8. I can't remember the age exactly. So, you've got a period. I know loads of kids that came out as leaders. They came out of the womb and they were showing leadership from a really early age. Not everybody has the opportunity and the avenue to explore that. However, I definitely think that, it's going to answer the question that you'll come to at the end, that there are leaders that are born just with natural drive, energy, passion, ability to challenge and question everything, right? And to do their own thing, to set the stall out and do their own thing. Equally, there are people that find their way into it and build from very, very humble beginnings.
My children go to preschool. There's 22 other kids in their class. There are 2 kids in my kids' class that have so much charisma, and they've been in the same class since they were 2 years old. So at 2, these little toddlers there's a little boy and a little girl, Liam and OJ, and they are the most popular kids in my kids' preschool. It's like, we can't have a party unless Liam's coming around. We can't have a party unless OJ's coming around. So I look at these 2 charismatic little people and I go, if their parents and if the school environment and if their friends continue to nurture and celebrate their charisma, they're born leaders. But likewise, if they went to the wrong schools and their charisma was knocked out of them because people think that that's too creative and now you're acting up, then these little charismatic human beings could miss their leadership potential just because of their environment. So I do believe that all infants are creative, and I do believe that some infants are charismatic. And the role of parents and school and education and society is to really enable their strengths to flourish. But we don't see that all the time.
And it's interesting because charisma is one of those words that's often associated with strong leaders. They've got charisma, they've got something special.
X factor.
Right, the X factor. And actually, if you think about the origins of the word charisma, so it comes from the Greek word meaning gift. So it kind of implies that it's a gift that some people have and not others, which I think has helped to kind of cement some sort of view that leaders are born, not made. Charisma is one of those things that, if it's harnessed and if you create the environment for them, then they can flourish. But equally, I've seen some amazing kids that just haven't fulfilled their potential because the environment wasn't right, or the situation wasn't right, or they didn't give the opportunities and the breaks that they needed in order to fulfill their potential.
And I guess there are other leaders who are the ones sort of quietly, calmly, perhaps not as creative, but are loved by their teams because they care. And it's sort of, again, we come back to this different type of leader. If everyone was super creative, then perhaps there'd be. It goes a little bit to business chemistry, doesn't it, Tim?
It does.
Right. So you've got your sort of your pioneer integrators, etc., your drivers, but then you need the guardians as well to be sort of quietly
and the
pushing it
integrators.
back, and the integrators.
And I think as well on the different leaders point. So there is another aspect, which is it requires different leadership skills and capabilities and types to lead different situations. Startups versus running BAU versus transformational. It requires different types of leaders to face into those different. Not everybody is great at everything, right? But there's a core set of skills and capabilities that we all need, regardless of those situations.
And that's really important in the way that you design a leadership team. Because if you had a leadership team that was just full of one type, then that could turn into a very stifling and a limiting culture. And so as you're designing leadership teams, I think it kind of liberates any particular leader feeling that you've got to be all things to all people. But if you can have a complementary leadership team, so the entire organization can look at the leadership team and go, that is a full spectrum of humanity in the leadership team, and I can aspire to somebody or something in that group of men and women, then we've been successful at building leadership from a corporate perspective.
This has been such a brilliant conversation, and it's so good to get your perspectives on leaders and leadership and what it all means. And I think, for people listening, it would be interesting to hear about what some strategies are that they can use. And, Tim, it might be worth talking a little bit about the new Future Leaders programme here at Deloitte for managers, senior managers, directors, very much aimed at women and ethnic minorities, and sort of how that is helping to develop our leaders.
Great question. So I would say to anybody, it starts by understanding who you are and how you show up as a leader, and getting valuable 360 feedback on that. That's hopefully an honest view, not a view of I'll tell you what I think you want to hear because you're doing my rating at the end of the year. So I think there is something about properly building your self-awareness, and then I think it's about understanding what's available to help and support you on that. And again, one size doesn't fit all. We're all unique, and therefore we all need different journeys and paths. Fortunately, the development pieces that we're working on, I would say in the past 2-3 years to now, do take that into consideration, but there are still a number of organizations that run programs that are, like boot camps. You've just got to do this and tick the box. What's really encouraging about some of the stuff that we're doing in the firm, and we've just recognized the importance of leadership development at all levels, and leadership's such a broad word in itself, right? But recognizing the journey piece. Equally, we're recognizing the importance of things like sponsorship. So we're running a piece in financial services and in our consumer business, really to think about how we sponsor, and the target audience is women at the moment, but how we sponsor women through to senior positions in the firm, recognizing that there is a mission to be performed there.
I really like that point, that it's not one size fits all. Jonathan, I'd be interested to get your view on kind of the importance of diversity in leadership, and not just visible diversity like gender or race, but diversity of thought and lived experience, and how important that is when it comes to leadership and nurturing leadership qualities.
Yeah, I feel very, very proud of the fact that when we set up 21st Century Brand, my co-founder and I are on opposite ends of the intellectual and creative spectrum. He's much more academic than I am. I bend towards pop culture probably more than he does, but I was very, very conscious of the gift that both of us presented when we walked into a client meeting room, and it was like, whatever type of creativity or intellectual superpower the client was looking at, Neil and I could deliver. And it was really, really effective. And so quite early on in the life cycle of 21st Century Brand, Neil and I were like, you and I are effective because we're so different. And so as we are recruiting more people, we have to look for difference. And we're a team of 45 consultants now in Europe and North America. And I get such a thrill when we all come together, because in every aspect, we're just different. But the thing that we all have in common is we want to do great work for great clients. And so the mission of the company is the one thing that we're all completely united around. But how we get there, well, that's great. It's a surprise to each and every one of us with every single project that we do, because we all are so very different. And I always remember the satisfaction of walking into a room with Neil when there were only 2 people in the company and going, clients love us because we're so different. So let's scale our difference.
I love that. Yeah. Unfortunately, we are rapidly running out of time.
Right.
Before we get to the big question of today, one final question for you both, which is one last piece of leadership advice for anyone listening, and myself and Lizzie, obviously.
Absolutely, we're writing notes, aren't we?
So the last piece of advice for anybody really thinking about how they can enhance their leadership capabilities is to recognize that it isn't a concept, it is a practice. And it is a daily practice. Being a great leader is learning how to use a particular set of muscles. How do you kind of make sure that the muscles are nourished in the right way? Podcasts, leadership books, being very, very conscious of what you want to take from other leaders and what you don't want to take from other leaders, and just committing yourself on a daily basis to become a better leader. There isn't a day that I wake up and I don't think, right, okay, how am I going to lead this particular conversation today? It's a daily practice. I make myself very conscious of it, and I know that I will never be done. And the reason why I'll never be done is the human beings that are in front of me are changing all the time.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. Great answer.
Tim?
Going to sound like a broken record, and I'm going to be echoing you, but I think it is be brave, right? You've got to be open to learning new things that might scare the hell out of you, and you might need to step into water that you're unfamiliar with, right? You've got to step outside your comfort zone, and then get curious. So really, really, curious about who you are, what your values are, what you stand for as a leader, what your innate capabilities, strengths are, but equally the areas that you need to develop in, and then find those situations to develop. But be hungry for learning, for knowledge, for information. Be observant. see what's going on in the world outside you, see the things that inspire, the things that don't inspire, the things that drive action in the right direction.
And I think we are now at the big question. So to wrap up today's podcast, let's bring it back to the question. If you can sort of answer this in one or two sentences, are leaders born or are they made? Tim, I'll come to you first.
The Centre for Creative Leadership did a study of 361 C-level leaders. 19% suggest that leaders are born, 52% that they're made, and the remainder, you can do the math, a bit of both. Yeah. I would say a bit of both, definitely a bit of both. There are some leaders that are born, some leaders that are made.
And I think that we're all born with the potential to lead, but our life circumstances either accelerate and amplify that, or they slow it down and diminish it. But all little people are born with the potential to become great leaders.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, both of you, for your honesty, your advice, your insights. It's been such a great conversation. Thank you very much.
I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Thank you. That was very, very good.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We release a new episode every other Tuesday with another big question, so don't forget to hit follow or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching. That way, you'll be alerted whenever a new episode drops. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by Lizzie Elston, Ethan Worth and Annie Wong. Thanks to our creative studio for all their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett.